Hello, I am your GM Brian, and welcome back to another video. This time we're going to be discussing episode 2, The Hunt Begins, in my Star Wars D&D 5th edition actual play. And it actually starts with the end of the first episode, where we had a brief introduction with the newest character. A reminder that my players and we've been playing for about 10 sessions beforehand, so that way we kind of got into the groove of things, and the players' characters have already gotten to know each other. So the newest character that got added into the scene is Lucian, who is played by Ryan, who is a Cathrees, so he's like a cat humanoid with gray fur and a mohawk, um, who is, Aurora technically has some force abilities, but Lucian is a full-fledged Force user. I think he's playing as the Counselor class. So he has like a lightsaber that he chose as part of his backstory, that he automatically starts with a lightsaber. I'm like, okay, all right. It's a very powerful weapon, but that limited him in other aspects as well. And so he had a brief introduction at the end of the first episode, but now that we're in the second episode, we actually he's actually a part of us now. And so he ended up just joining late in the middle of our session, which we were like, we just need to start going. He said he's going to join us, so he'll just hop into the call, and we'll just keep going from there. And it worked out actually really nicely in the story beat that he got there. It was really nice timing, where basically the players, Aurora and Silvaris, had like just started stepping outside and were like, what's going on? And then Lucian shows up. And it was kind of neat, where I got to spook Jordan a little bit, who plays Aurora, where I was basically, to recap the end of the first episode, I said, you turn around and you see Lucian standing there. Um, what do you say? And he was thrown off, like, why would you introduce him into the scene if Ryan isn't even here? Um, but in fact, he was. He missed the notification saying that he joined into our call, and so it worked out really nice, and some good laughs with Jordan's lack of observance with that. But in The Hunt Begins, the group have decided to follow the breadcrumbs to House Scala, where the guards that had come into the cantina and had arrested the young man. They were wearing House Scala armor. They had, like, maybe their badge or whatever, and they had been given a piece of paper saying that this arrest is authorized by House Scala or whatever. And they quickly learned that, in fact, those people who were wearing those uniforms were not actually with House Scala, that they were someone else. Players don't know yet. They have some assumptions, but it was not House Scala. So their first move was to go to House Scala and talk to whoever's in charge and find out what in the world is going on. So House Scala is one of the several, like, trading businesses that's in the system, or specifically on Kularin, where basically they're kind of like a Amazon warehouse kind of deal, distributor, where goods get brought into the system, they buy them, they sell them at a higher price, and then they make profit, that kind of deal. And they have their own security detachment. Although their their uniforms had gotten stolen. It actually states that in the module that the uniforms got stolen from the laundromat, and it kind of it's interesting to look at the dynamic of, like, how detailed do you want your world to be, because when you think of Star Wars, you don't think of like, oh yeah, the laundromat. Yes. I loved that scene when the main characters went to the laundromat and they asked about the stolen uniforms in the laundromat. No. They did, they're in the barracks. They're in like in buildings of importance, or they're in the Senate building, or they're in the secret hideout base, or they're on the Death Star. They're in the important areas, until you get to like episode 4 where they're in the trash compactor, like the trash compactor. Why? But anyway, so like a mundane place like the laundromat, it's interesting because you think, oh, the laundromat. Well, where do they get their water from to wash their clothes? Where does the used water go? And you got all these different questions about the logistics and the different utilities that are involved, like that are in actual real life. And it's like, okay, so that means there's some kind of soap trade going on somewhere to clean clothes and to clean yourself and whatever. But it's like, you don't really think about those logistics when you're talking about Star Wars. But there are things that need to be done in the day to day that don't get covered in the movies or in the TV shows, at least as far as I know. But anyway, the players make their way to House Hirschkala. Again, one of the trading houses. There's a couple of them inside, I think, the very city that they're in. There's like already like 2 or 3. But in House Hirschkala, this one is led by a Trandoshan named Nimri, who he becomes more important on a later date. And I think in a couple of episodes, or I think after, I believe it is going to be like after episode 5 or 6, it becomes a bit more important. But he does return. So it's interesting role playing as Nimri and having basically knowing what he's doing behind the scenes. He needs to act a certain way. So Sovaris, played by Zach, he has a tendency he plays like more of a mercenary role, very under the table kind of deals, or wants to do stuff off the books and not be affiliated with anything. But Nimri is a bit more upstanding. He's got a business to uphold, and that if he became known for hiring mercenaries off the books and like doing some more sleazy things, it could be bad for business. It's an interesting balance because he does have needs and wants that need to be met for his business. And Sovaris throughout the episode gave some really good points, but I started to be like, yeah, but Nimri doesn't deal with those kinds of people in that capacity. So while Sovaris was trying to smooth a deal over, like, oh, we'll just get a favor, it's like, no, he doesn't work in favors. He just works in credits. He's a businessman. So ended up paying him, basically giving him room and lodge, hiring him onto his security detail in an official capacity, which in a game mechanic sense meant that the players had a place to rest and they would also get paid. Like this would become their base of operations. Now, originally in the module, this is supposed to be, or that role, the capacity that Nimri is filling was supposed to be met with Rena's transport service. And in the next episode, in episode 3, you'll quickly learn why that doesn't go so smoothly, and that I ended up working more towards with Nimri, with House Hirschkala. It just ended up flowing naturally that way as well, where one thing I've also noticed is that Sovaris and like the party as a whole tries to dip their fingers, and they try to get double paid, like as much as they can, sometimes as much as triple paid, where we recently had a session. Now, granted, we're at the end at the time of this recording on November 18th. Video probably to go out November 19th. We're like basically at the end of the campaign arc right now, and the players are like, we're being sent on this quest to go do this thing, and we're gonna get paid by them. But then we're going to on the way to the quest, we end up getting in contact with a third party who also wants that same quest done. So we're gonna get paid by them as well, because they don't know that we're talking with them back there. We're talking with you right now. You know, a similar enemy of my enemy, and they're gonna get paid by both. So it's been a little bit interesting, and I have to watch out for that as well, where basically the I need to play a little bit more hardball with my dealings, and so it's just a learning curve, to say the least, but it's still fun. The negotiations eventually do smooth over. It did take me a long while to actually edit out and structure out that conversation, because there was a lot of, and I do this as well, and I've found in my few editing sessions where I will double talk about something, and I'll like say a point, and then I'll say a point again, but just slightly different, and it ends up at the same place. And so when I go back and I do it, I go, and I cringe really hard at myself, and I go, yeah, I just said the same thing again. This is boring. Let's just edit it out. The order that which that conversation happened with Nimri, between my players and Nimri, happened in a very different order. And so I wanted to have the order that which they had their conversation naturally grew towards at the end being hired for the job, because they ended up getting they got some information, they got hired for the job, or they got the security detail job, and then they kept asking more questions. It didn't feel quite right when going back and listening to it from the aspect of like how story and how things naturally go. So I ended up having them go through the conversation, editing back and forth a couple of parts until it naturally led up to, like, I think there's one point where Aurora ends up speaking for a good chunk amount of time. Well, that was originally broken up into several different sections throughout the conversation. It just made sense when I was editing it and having Aurora keep speaking, to have Jordan keep speaking, giving these points in the response from Nimri, and then going back into it, and then Silvaris interjecting with something that was like pertinent to that point, and I'm like, okay, that's completely off topic, but you know what? This topic gets brought up again in a later point. Let's bring in that later point to bring it right now. And so it was fun to edit the video back and forth a little bit to get a naturally flowing conversation, and I'm getting a little bit better at that and like identifying that. And then I'm hoping that, like, since that conversation that happened so long ago at this point, that now my conversations flow a little bit smoother. But the main thing is that it got done and that now the next episode 3, which I don't remember what the name of it is going to be, but I've already got it down. But episode 3 is going to begin with this explosion that happens at the end of episode 2. So episode 2 ends with them leaving House Scala, basically rounding a corner, and then there's a huge explosion that happens, and there's alarms going off, and it's going to be things are going to keep escalating from that point there, and a few more details get dropped. So I'm hoping that you stick around throughout the series, and that you watch episode 3, and that you have just as much fun as I had when we were running the game live as you do watching it. And if that's something that is interesting to you and that you enjoyed, make sure to give us subscribe if you feel so inclined. and we'll see you in the next one.